On this Good Friday, perhaps more than any other year of my life, I've been reminded of the travesty of humans upon humans, especially when you have an insane, paranoid person in charge of a government and people are disappearing and things look really dark. There's threats to around the world. There was another time when that was true. Well, several, actually, but there's another time 2,000 years ago when that was true. Tiberius had been a late in life emperor. He hadn't come to the throne until his mid 50s, which was highly unusual at the time. He was not a happy person. He had buried his dear brother. He had uh, allowed himself to be blackmailed into relationships he didn't want. He didn't trust the people around him. He built up uh, certain members of the Senate once he became the emperor, and then those people turned on him. Ultimately, when he died, he was incredibly paranoid. Many had been killed in his name because he believed that there was the conspiracy against him. Um, and when they thought they had finally gotten rid of him, that he was finally dying, that his predecessor, or his successor rather, had come to visit him on his deathbed, and that he didn't die, a couple of people took care of that, and Tiberius was no more. But while he was emperor, he was paranoid. He was ruthless. It was a time of lack of trust. And the reason that matters is because it's in the middle of that time of trust when Roman officials, they got out of Dodge as soon as they could because they had no idea if they were going to be the next to end up being murdered. They Those who had business to do in Jerusalem and in Judea kind of were quite happy to head off in that direction. Tiberius ruled at the same time that Jesus lived and the end of Jesus' ministry. And Jesus was a victim of the state. That's why he was killed. It was not for any other purpose. Now, one of the things that Good Friday gives us an opportunity to remember, because we're going to be hearing a lot of people say today that Jesus died for our sins. That's called atonement theology, and that is not acceptable. That's actually I would love to see it called heresy. This notion that we are so hideously human as human beings that Jesus has to sacrifice himself like an animal brought for slaughter to appease a vengeful God. Now, a few things wrong with that. One is that Jesus never said that was the way it was happening. Number one. Number two is the vengeful God idea that came in with the Greeks and the Romans. That's Zeus. That was never, ever part of the Hebrew understanding of God. A punitive God, for sure, a God that abandoned them uh, when they misbehaved, as a way of understanding why it was they were having cultural struggles and political struggles, absolutely, but not a God that wanted a blood sacrifice to justify things. See, Jesus taught that we're all forgiven. No matter what we do, doesn't matter. We now have to be in right relationship with each other. That was the sin that Jesus was talking about. That's the corporate sin that we were a part of. Jesus did not die on on Good Friday for our sins. Didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. The reason something like that got a lot of wind and a lot of action, well, there's two reasons. First of all, it's understandable. We as a species will understand sacrificing ourselves for those we love and those who are part of our family, but we will not sacrifice ourselves for strangers. It's a concept we just cannot grasp. Every generation, there are a few that will, but it's a level of submission to the greater good that most of us are just not prepared to do. The other part of that is that by looking at ourselves, our brokenness, it was a great way for the institutions to control us. So it was not a matter of understanding there was something bigger here. By us looking at ourselves and how awful we are, we didn't pay attention to what was going on around us. And institutionally, the church and governments and everything else have depended on that, feeding into the self-interests of everyone. So it was very easy for us to say, oh, Jesus died for our sins because we're awful people. And God expects that of Jesus, of us, of the universe, for this blood offering. It makes sense. Problem is, it's not ever what Jesus talked about. On this Good Friday, we have to remember that Jesus died a political death. The death that Tiberius was visiting upon anybody he decided in his paranoia was against him. The political deaths, metaphorically and physically, that are happening in our modern world with people who stand up to authorities. And it's one thing when it was in theory, but we have it south of the border now. Someone who is capable and probably has decided that death for people is purely justified. The thing is, Jesus taught us to face that. When he went to his death, it was a voluntary thing. Remember, we talked about on Monday, Thursday, yesterday, that the whole concept of leader and the blood of a leader in the Hebrew tradition was that they go first and they experience it first. They're there to show us that they will stand up for us. That's the death Jesus did, going quite willingly into a setup, knowing that both Pilate and Herod were not prepared to take ownership for that, and that the Judeans were, with the establishment, the people with the temple, they had a level of paranoia themselves, fear. If everything was going crazy in Rome, what was going to be happening in Jerusalem? And the thing is, the fear was not misplaced. It would take a few generations, but then they would lose their city. They would be dispersed throughout, known as the Great Jewish Diaspora. They would lose what they came. The temple would be destroyed. They weren't wrong in any of that worry. But see, here's the thing. All of these are temporal things. All of these are physical things that we are told to value. Jesus tried to teach us something else. As he went forward, he tried to give us a lifestyle, showing us that our value is only in how we take care of each other, how we step up for each other, how we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for each other. Jesus, yes, died for us, not as an atonement, not as a payment, but as someone who loved us so deeply that he would put himself out there first to be our protection, to show us the way, to be our leader in how things needed to change, willing to stand up against oppression. While Good Friday is our darkest day of our faith, it is also an opportunity for us to gather together and say, we will stand up for things. The disciples, by the end of Good Friday, they were not hovering in or hiding in the upper room because of their own personal belief in their badness. They were hovering in that room because they were scared they were next. That's what it means to stand up, and none of them were. We have the inspirations by the disciples, no matter how broken and confused and how much they didn't get it. We have the examples of them, and we have the examples of Jesus' life to stand up against oppression. Very few of us are going to meet that end, thankfully, but more will if we don't take that initiative, step up like Jesus showed us to do, speak truth to power, threaten those who are in leadership, not get sidetracked by those who have paranoia or are not smart enough to be real leaders. Be present in people's lives. Take this as permission to make a difference.